Do you ever feel stuck? Like you're repeating the same thoughts, the same patterns, and no matter what you try, you just can't shake it off? Yep, me too. Today on What's My Body Telling Me, I'm joined by the brilliant Dr Emily Musgrove, who you might know as the resident psychologist on the Imperfects podcast and the author of the new book, Unstuck. We dive deep into why we sometimes feel totally immobilised by indecision, anxiety, or even physical symptoms, and how tuning into your body can help you finally break free. Emily and I even unpack one of my own recurring thought patterns live, which I have a sneaky feeling you'll relate to as well. So if you're ready to understand what your body's actually trying to tell you when you're feeling stuck and how to shift out of it, this episode was made for you. Welcome back to the What's My Body Telling Me podcast. Today we are joined by the lovely Dr. Emily Musgrove, who you may know from the Imperfects podcast. So welcome, Emily. Thanks for joining us.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, well, it's amazing to see you. And as we just spoke about off air there, I was looking through your website before we jumped on this podcast, and you have that amazing quote by Viktor Frankl. And he says, between stimulus and response, there is a space. And in that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. And my whole mission is helping women that are lost in this space between in healthcare. So I wonder what you feel like the difference is when people are in this space. What makes a difference between someone who thrives and someone who might feel stuck?
That is such a good question. I think, in some ways, the thriving comes from being able to slow down enough to have the space. So the stuckness in my experience comes from the sense that things are happening to us and that there is no space for choice in there, that we're kind of acting in some ways on automatic pilot. So a thriving in many respects is, even with the existence of pain, that we can still find a way to show up when we're doing that really intentionally. So, how we create the capacity to tune in and to notice and to kind of question ourselves and to stay aligned, I guess, with what we value. It's from that place, I think, that we then get an opportunity to move towards more vitality, I think.
I love that. So how would someone know if they are in this space, or we are all in this space every single second of the day because we're choosing our response? How would someone know if they were stuck? Because I think a lot of us do operate on autopilot. What are some of those symptoms that you might be able to notice in yourself?
Yeah, great. So I think that's actually probably the most fundamental part of becoming unstuck, is to be able to notice and to tune in. So having an awareness of what those signs might be is absolutely pivotal, really. So first of all, just to acknowledge that there is something very functional and really adaptive about autopilot. So, if we think about when you first learned to drive a car, as an example, you had to attend with such concentration to these new skills. And so you might have found, for example, that at the end of a driving lesson or an end of a time practicing driving, that you were really exhausted, that it took so much energy, concentration. And so that is you not acting on autopilot. That's you being very intentional and deliberate. But over time, that skill becomes ingrained and encoded, and we now no longer have to pay attention to it. So you can drive without really having to attend to all the the minutiae of the skills that are required for driving. Now you can imagine that if we weren't doing that, if autopilot wasn't happening there and we were having to attend with such concentration and presence all of the time, we actually would just be overloaded. The system would be overloaded and we would become very overwhelmed and really exhausted. So I want to really mention that there's something very functional about autopilot. We do need it. The problem happens when we're spending all of our time there. So it's as though our behaviors become so automatic. Our reactions are very automatic. And we lose, we really lose the capacity in there to notice that we might have more of a choice than we realize. So in terms of the subtle signs of kind of being in that stuck place, it does present itself in lots of different ways. I guess very classically, if we look at kind of the definition of being stuck, there's this sense here of being very immobilised or paralysed. So this kind of sense that I can't really move. I can't move forward. So It might be that you're stuck in indecision. Like I actually find it really difficult to make a decision. And so indecision actually helps me it's almost like it keeps me safe here because I'm not taking a risk in either way. It can look like boredom. It's this kind of sense of feeling listless, unsatisfied, almost like a feeling that you're kind of going through the motions. So nothing's really kind of lighting you up, I suppose. So that would be quite an obvious sign, this kind of sense of boredom, irritation, dissatisfaction. And then at the other end of the spectrum, we could also see that stuckness can look like heightened anxiety. So feeling this sense that it's almost as though the way that I'm living at this moment is no longer serving me, but I don't know what to do about it. That's a very common kind of presentation that I would see, is that people will come because they're stuck in some kind of struggle with pain. Yeah.
With pain as in physical body pain? Like can it manifest as physical symptoms?
Absolutely. I mean, like you would know in your work too, Anthea, that, it's absolutely inextricably linked. This mind-body connection is undeniable. So yes, I mean, absolutely. We could see, particularly for something like chronic stress and burnout, I mean, of course it will show up in terms of the body. So, I might have people come in who have a lot of kind of unexplained physical symptoms. So they've gone and done a whole lot of testing and nothing's coming back. But there might be even simple things like lots of tightness in the neck and the upper back area, which we can really see as an indication of the stress response. So this kind of contraction in the muscles. So we're kind of really kind of responding to this threat in a very physical way. And that absolutely lends itself to experiencing far more physical pain. Also, as you would be aware, kind of the actual experience of physical illness. So susceptibility to more colds, flus, kind of more of the minor end of the spectrum. But then also in the longer term, if we look at that, I'm really going down a rabbit hole now.
I love it.
If we're looking at the longer term results or impact of the chronic activation of the stress response, is that we do know that there is a link there between, really significant illness, and I don't want to be too catastrophic here, but there are absolute correlations here. And I will make that distinction between correlation and causation. But we do know that it's a risk factor for high mortality diseases. So yes, to answer your question originally, yes, absolutely, being stuck in pain can look like a physical pain and it can look like physical illness. But being stuck in pain can also look like getting stuck in our internal dialogues. It can look like getting stuck in the pain of deep and intense emotion. And I think that kind of sits at the heart really of like the work that I do, is like, how do we navigate and find a way forward even when this pain is here, so that we can kind of learn to live alongside it rather than it pushing us around so much.
Yeah, I love that. And I love the piece that you were talking about with the physical body, and particularly even something as subtle as upper neck headaches, because I'm originally a chiropractor and I would see so many people with this. And it's so interesting. Even sometimes when I think about sort of where we're talking about mentally feeling stuck, like the story part of our brain, it's the story. It's focusing on the past, the future. It's trying to make sense of everything, and we can get stuck there. It doesn't know how to tell time. It doesn't realize that that's not actually happening now. But a lot of the times when our shoulders are rounded, say for instance, we're sitting at a desk and work isn't actually stressful, like it's going well. Profit and loss is amazing. Everyone's saying that you're doing a great job. You've got plenty of time, but you're sitting rounded or you're looking down at your phone rounded. Your posture can actually change how your mind is perceiving what's happening. Yeah. It's insane. There's something that I do. I'm going to share it now because it might help the listeners. There's something that I do with my patients and I say, pretend like you're a lioness. Like, how does a lioness move?
Oh, I just got the shivers. Yeah.
And they love it. Like literally, I do it and I go on a call with them after I've told them and they literally look like a completely different person.
Yeah.
Because sometimes, and this is what I wanted to ask you next, is how do we get out of that stuckness, that I think of it sort of as that story part of our brain? How do we get out of that? Because I know one of the tactics that I help with people is changing their body to get out of it. So how do we, from your perspective, how do we get out of that story or that stuckness in our mind?
So it's, in some ways, it's quite a complex process. And so I'm hopefully going to simplify, the way that I would work there. The first for me is having some kind of practice that is allowing for a greater attunement, both to the body and to what's happening in the mind. So for me personally, that would be something like a mindfulness practice. And what it's inviting or asking us to do is to step off of that autopilot and come into what's called the being mode. So that there's no striving here. We're not trying to achieve a particular state. And I know that that can be a myth around mindfulness meditation, for example, is that we're trying to clear the mind or create relaxation. It's actually not about that at all. It's really about attunement and bringing awareness. And so that awareness sometimes can feel very uncomfortable, but it's that discomfort that holds a lot of information, and it's with that information that we can then really choose to make other choices, for example. But so to start off with, yes, we need to have some kind of practice that allows us to tune in and to become really aware of this interior kind of landscape. So yes, that can look like mindfulness meditation. It could look like yoga. It could look like journaling, and there are so many ways in which we can do journaling. It could look like being in nature. So, being able to step out of like the phone and the internet and to be in an environment that is like really evoking a sense of awe. So something that is going to slow you down. So this is that for me is the first thing, is like, how do we slow down enough to really notice what's here and to notice what is serving me and what's not serving me. From that place, we can then really have a look at what's the mind telling me. So we can start to get to like almost get familiar with like the tape in the mind that we have, usually some very well-worn stories that will show up. And like, I could see you laughing
I'm
there.
laughing because I have one. I'm like, oh, maybe we could do a live one with me now.
Yeah, totally.
So I realized last night, so yesterday, for reference, I woke up at 5, just before sunrise, go out, watch the sunrise, do things for myself. And then I started work at probably 7:30 in the morning, and I finished at probably 7:30 at nighttime. And I was having a shower, and all in the shower, I was thinking, you haven't done enough. Everything was, it's not enough. You're doing all these things. And I'm just like, I'm stuck in this loop of, I'm physically doing so much, but I feel like it's never going to be enough.
Yeah.
And then I just caught myself. I started laughing. Like, I'm like, I've done a lot of work and with different practitioners and on myself. And it's like, you can know the things. It's like, oh, this bloody story keeps coming back. So what would you say to that?
Yeah. Oh, there's lots of things. So first of all, I might just ask you, if you didn't catch it, what would be the cost of holding tightly to that thought for you?
Oh my gosh, poor sleep. My skin would flare up. I would feel terrible. I'd think that I'd be literally stuck. I think that, oh my gosh, I'm doing all these things, but I'm never going to feel how I want to feel or have the life that I want, because it's all just not going to be enough.
Yeah. And do you think it's possible that like, if you were to hold and attach tightly to that thought, that it might kind of drive your choices of behavior and action too? Like, if you're holding tightly to that?
I know it does. And that's what I realize. I'm like, I don't want to, like, there's all the manifestation and abundance mindset and all the things, right? I'm like, if I'm being driven and my actions are being driven by, it's not enough in any way, shape or form, I'm like, oh, well, I'm working here all the time and I'm not spending enough time with my friends and my family, and I want to be able to do that. And now I'm feeling guilty that I'm not, because I'm not enough here, and then I'm not enough there in those parts of my life. So I know that the cost is that I'm guilting myself in every area of my life.
Yeah. And that's exhausting.
Happy. Yeah. Which I want. Majority of the time. I know you can't be happy all the time, but yeah, it's exhausting.
Yeah, so it's a little bit like, that story, it's like it's sitting in the driver's seat of the car and you're the passenger. And so it's like that story directs where you're going in some ways, like it's in charge. And so we're driven, and there will be, of course, like for anybody, there will be a learning history attached to that story. So that's probably one that has been held or experienced from many younger years ago. But it's like when it sits in the driver's seat, it then directs your behavior in order to try and help you be enough in some ways.
It has been a helpful driver. It's like, oh, wow, okay, well, it's going to make you be like, okay, well, start a business, study 3 degrees, like write a best-selling book, do these things. It's like, okay, I want to feel
Mhm.
good in the pursuit of
Yeah.
that, not necessarily be driven by it's not gonna be enough, and then you get it, and then it's like,
Yeah.
"I did it. What's the next
Uh-huh.
thing then?"
Exactly. And I think that's such a great point in there, is that there's such an unrelenting nature to those sorts of stories. And so if we imagine that story that I'm not enough, or it's not enough, is in the driver's seat, it kind of is driving you with like probably like a lot of inner critic stuff in there in an effort to try and keep you safe in some way. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, like intuitively, we might think that we want to speak back to that story with a lot of kind of contradictory information, or we might tell it to be quiet or to
I think it's
F
so
off.
nice that I was thinking that's not the language that my internal critic uses. "I'll be quiet." I'm like, "That's definitely not what it says."
Yeah, so it's probably a lot
Yes.
harsher than that.
Yes, yes.
But that's our intuitive response, is that when this critic or this story shows up, we will do one of two things. We will try either we will try and avoid it. So we withdraw, or we become like, for example, you might just want to go to bed. You might use drugs or alcohol or food to kind of drown out the intensity of this not enoughness, for example. Or we become really what's called fused with it. We become really overwhelmed and experience like an intense emotional response to that story. And so, like, whilst this might sound really very challenging, the approach that I use, which is grounded primarily in acceptance and commitment therapy, brings with it this knowledge that there is nothing to change about your thoughts, except that we want to change our relationship to them. So, what I mean by that is that instead of that story sitting in the driver's seat, we are going to change it so that it's sitting in the passenger seat alongside us and we're in the driver's seat. So, these thoughts, stories, emotions can be here without us having to engage in a battle with them.
Mhm.
So, if you imagine that if you have this story that, like, I'm not enough, and then this kind of logical brain comes in and says, Anthea, you're being ridiculous. Like, look at all this stuff you've done, blah, 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 blah. And then that inner critic story comes up and says, but you still could be doing this. And so it kind of engages in this ongoing struggle. And then what happens is, like, well, let me ask you, what happens if you kind of get engaged in that kind of inner dialogue?
Well, I think previously before, I feel like I can create more space with it now,
Yeah,
but prior to, I would
yeah,
just be I'd feel like there's not enough time in the day, and I
yeah,
wanna be split between 10 different places,
yeah,
and
yeah.
it's just like, again,
Mm-hmm,
reinforcing there's not enough. There's not enough time for connection,
mm-hmm,
not enough money, not enough space, not enough not enough anything.
mm-hmm,
So,
mm-hmm.
it becomes overwhelming if I'm fused
Yeah,
with it.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And it really kind of highlights too this stress response there. This kind of not enoughness, kind of really highlights a scarcity experience. And in scarcity, we sit in threat, or we're sitting in a stress response. So over a long period of time, chronically exposed to this not enoughness is really, really hard.
How many times have you been told everything looks fine while you still feel exhausted, bloated, anxious, have skin issues, period pain, and totally feel off? Without saying it, people are thinking it's all in your head. But you know something isn't right. Your body knows it too. And let me tell you, your symptoms, they aren't random. They're messages. Messages that blood tests don't always pick up because they only show a snapshot in time. Great when you're bad enough to need medication or surgery, not so great when you want to make sense of your body. If you really want to understand what's happening beneath the surface, that's where Test Your Fundamentals comes in. This isn't just another test, it's a functional health tool that gives you real answers. Using HDMA, or hair tissue mineral analysis, it gives you a 3-month report card of how your body's been functioning, internally and externally, showing exactly why you're feeling the way you do. Unlike standard blood work, HDMA can detect nutrient imbalances, heavy metals, and deficiencies that could be wreaking havoc on your hormones, mood, metabolism, and gut. So instead of guessing what supplements you need or throwing money at another miracle diet, this gives you real, personalized answers about what your body actually needs. Here's how it works. You'll get a personalized HTMA test, a breakdown of your results in plain English, access to practitioner quality supplements, and a step-by-step lifestyle recommendations tailored to your 4 fundamentals. So you know exactly how to support your body your way. Your body isn't broken and it's always working for you. You just need the right tools to listen. That's what Test Your Fundamentals gives you. So if you're ready to stop guessing and start taking action, head to femalefundamentals.com.au and order your Test Your Fundamentals hair test today. There's also a link in our show notes. Now because I have a lot more awareness, and as you said at the very beginning, the first step is becoming aware. It's like, oh, okay, I'm aware that I was in autopilot. And now, okay, what do I do? And now I feel like, okay, I'm aware. And yesterday, for instance, for me, myself, I know when I identify a story, I can go really deep. I'm like, okay, what psychological technique am I going to use to try and get myself out of this thing? And what happens? I just dig myself deeper and deeper and deeper. I fertilize myself. I'm like, well, I just feel worse. Great.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's where seeing another person, a therapist of some kind, is very helpful. But I found for me, like yesterday, I was like, okay, what does my body want to do? I know I come back to
That's
my
great.
body and I'm like, okay, I'm going to put on this music and I'm going to dance how I want to. I was like, okay, I'm going to cry, or I'm going to punch the pillow, or I'm going to scream, I'm going to do whatever. And that's how I feel like I can get myself out of the beginning of a spiral, I suppose. But now for me, it's the question of, okay, what story am I running to replace it? And how do I identify my behaviors? Because it's like, I feel like I'm like, oh my gosh, are all my behaviors being driven by this? Like, how do I know now whether it's being driven by that story or a different one? So I guess that's sort of the place that I'm at now. Well, I
That's
think.
so interesting. Gosh, there's so many things in there. I just first of all want to acknowledge the importance of kind of stepping into the body. Like you're reflecting there, that sometimes when we get so caught up in our heads, it's like we are completely disconnected from the body. And often something that I would do with my clients is, first of all, is to name the story, and to name it with what's called like really observing language. I'm just going to go on a bit of a tangent, but I promise I'll come back to your question.
I love tangents.
If you imagine that the observing self is, and this is a metaphor that is used commonly in ACT, and Russ Harris has a wonderful book that explains this more adeptly, but the observing self is basically the self that remains untouched by our stories, untouched by our emotional experience. It's the one that is there all the time, that can observe what is happening, but is not connected to it. So it's a little bit like the observing self is the blue sky, and our emotions and our thoughts are like the weather that comes across the sky. Regardless of what weather is here, there is always a blue sky above it. And that's the part that remains untouched by trauma, by our learning histories, by our current conditions. And that's the part that we want to cultivate more of. So, for example, if I was working with someone who was getting having a lot of rumination, getting stuck in like thought spirals, the first thing would be obviously to pause and something like taking a breath, and then to recognize, I'm noticing, here is my not enoughness story. So when we use that noticing language, it's like it creates, very much coming back to Viktor Frankl, it's creating the space between stimulus and response. So when I say I'm noticing, here is my not enoughness story, we've slowed it down, and we've also what's called diffused from it. So we're no longer attached so tightly to that thought. And then it might be a practice like, okay, so I can notice that this story is here and it's really driving me. Where do I feel this in the body? So that would be my next question, is like, how is this showing up in the body? And our emotions are so profoundly felt somewhere in the body. So for me, for example, it will be in my chest, or a feeling in my stomach. Other people can experience it like in all parts of the body, like a tightness in the leg muscles, for example. So it's almost like we step down from the ruminations and come into the body. And it's from there that we can offer or almost invite like a curiosity to, how is this being felt here? And what's the wisdom in those sensations, for example?
Mm-hmm.
So that's that first thing, is yes going to come into the body, and what is it that I need here? So that would be kind of really reflecting, I guess, what you're already doing too, Anthea. But to come kind of full circle around to that, okay, so if we've got this story, my first intuition is, do we need to have another story? As in, like, do we need to have an alternative?
Yeah, when you're saying before, it's like, oh, you don't have to engage with the story. I'm like, okay, right. I don't need an alternative story, because something that I have toyed with is going, okay, well, this is my reality is made up of what I feel, what I think, and what I do.
Mm-hmm.
So that's my current reality now. Okay. So if I think about the reality that I would like
Mm-hmm.
for growth wise,
Yeah.
what do I feel, think, and do in that reality?
Yeah.
So that's where I guess, or I'm like, okay, what am I thinking? That's the replacement of the story. Because I'm like, okay, that
Yeah.
version of me, what would she be thinking in this
Yeah.
situation?
Yeah. Great. And I
So,
think that ties into, a real connection there to values. So, if we're talking about, like, we get this one life to live, and how do I want to show up to it?
mhm.
And a big kind of avenue for really stepping into those sorts of questions is around uncovering what our values are. So, this is the kind of person I want to be. This is the kind of friend, sister, daughter, parent I want to be. And that is infused with particular qualities or values. And the values are really like a compass. So, they are kind of really, in some ways, they're not the stories, but it's like their essence. It's like my internal compass, the values that I hold. And our great challenge or task is to be able to tune into those. So, if you imagine that, like, I don't know, kindness is a value, and kindness is like, or a value is like heading west. We never reach west. It is an ongoing direction, but it provides us this compass. So that might be something that we would step into. Okay, so if this story, this other kind of unpleasant or long held, tightly held story is here, stepping down from that into the body, noticing the wisdom that's here in the body, noticing the capacity for choice, and then asking this question, how do I show up to my values? How do I kind of almost like get back on track here to keep living the life that would be important to me?
Yeah, I feel like that's like one of my values is, well, connection. I suppose you could put it
Mm-hmm.
under that umbrella, because I'm like, oh, I want to be, but this is my thing.
Yeah.
This is where I find I get stuck in this story, right? I'm like, oh, I want connection. So I want to be where I am and be fully there. So if I'm at the dinner table with partner, friends, family, I'm fully there. I'm not thinking about all these other things that I
Yeah.
haven't done because I haven't had enough time, money, connection, whatever it is, the story that it is. So I'm finding that, yeah, this story is really just infiltrating a lot of my life. But I think the value piece is, as you said before, we only get one
Yeah.
life.
Yeah.
And that is like my anchor every day. I want to feel as alive
Mm-hmm.
as I can
Yeah.
every
Yeah.
single day. That's the
Yeah.
point.
Yeah. Yeah. And I want to add in there too that um, there's nothing wrong with that story showing up. And I think that's sometimes where we can get really entangled with this sense that I shouldn't have this story. But like, realistically, the stories that we hold will at some point have been really adaptive for us. Like, we do need judgment to be able to live adaptively in the world. And so, like, if those stories are showing up, there's this invitation here to hold a compassion. It's almost like a lot of the work that I do often is around like this little part of us that was really at some point struggling or trying to navigate an environment, and it developed these stories to help us at that time. But in adulthood, it's like sometimes these stories no longer serve us or they cause us some harm. So we don't want to eradicate those stories because they've actually held a very important function for us. And so, from my point of view, it would be more like every time that story comes up, it may come up 1,000 times, but we just notice it. And it might be something like placing your hand on your heart. I do this quite a lot. Like placing your hand on your heart and going, like, I'm noticing you. I hear you. And then it may be something like, but you know what? You can step down for today, or you can take a little break, I've got this. So we almost like actually hold a compassion for that, what might be a critical story or that striving perfectionistic story. It's almost like we speak to that part of our experience with a great deal of nurture because it has held a very important function for us at some point or another.
So it's almost like, yeah, because sometimes I find, for instance, if there is a story, it's going, okay, well, where is this story from? Why is this here? And then going into there instead of going, oh, that's okay. I suppose my languaging, I can't even remember what you just said then, but I'm like, that was so much nicer than what I say. I say, oh, that's okay, I don't need you now. But it's like, oh, but that sort of feel like if I think about that story being like a little child,
Yeah.
and you said to a little child, that's okay, I don't need you now, they'd probably be like, oh, that hurts. Like, that's
Yeah,
not very nice.
that's a really good catch in there. Absolutely. You know, I think if we look at self-compassion as a therapeutic intervention or even as like a theoretical orientation, and we look at how we parent or how we were parented, the reality is that self-compassion is not a self-indulgence, and it's not like let everything off the hook response. It's actually very active. So, you know, it really kind of involves really acknowledging the suffering that's here and then turning to, okay, so what do I do next? So what's the action step that I can take here? And so, yeah, so that might be, so I'm just going to fix that. That might be slowing down enough to notice, here you are. Gosh, like it makes so much sense that you've shown up right now. Like, of course you're here. I get it.
You
It's like,
sound so nice. Can I like record your voice so that I can just have that in headphones? Like, gosh, that makes so much sense. Yeah, I'm like,
yeah,
oh, I feel so nice inside.
it's like, to be honest, like you have to also, like with that work, this is certainly how I would speak, but in this work, you have to also come up with a voice that feels authentic to you, because otherwise it's just going to be like that inner critic's going to come on board and say, Anthea, who are you kidding? Like this is not realistic. So like, some incarnation of,
Yes.
of a gentle response to the struggle that's here. But then it also can be a firm boundary. So it can be something like, of course you're here. Like, I totally get it. You're really worried. Like, you're worried for me. But you know what? I've got this for today. You know, you can come along with me. It's almost like we hold you in the pocket and I can attend to you every now and then. So it's almost like it's going to sneak out of the pocket and rear its head again. And you go, it's okay. You can go back. I've got this right now. But all of this requires such attunement to those like really automatic patterns.
So how might someone, because my attunement and awareness of this was not like it is now,
Yeah.
I would say 5 years ago, before I actually started going, oh, wow, wait, what? I'm not on autopilot anymore. I'm starting to notice this. So if someone is like, I don't even know what my patterns are, I don't even know what the beliefs are that I might have about myself that are keeping me stuck, how might someone start to become aware of that?
Well, again, probably like a practice of mindfulness meditation, for example. And the reason I say that is because if you were to do like a meditation practice, what will happen is that basically with the stillness and the quietness is that the thoughts emerge very rapidly. And the more that we practice something like meditation, we actually become really familiar with the fact that there are recurring beliefs and patterns that are showing up. So that's one practice in there that would be really helpful. I mean, it does require like sometimes like a deep dive. And again, like journaling can be really helpful to uncover what these beliefs are.
Is there, I was toying with something, and I'd love your opinion on this actually, because I just, I'm like, oh, my brain comes up with lots of ideas and I trial it out. That's just, I throw my body into the gauntlet. I'm on my own test bunny. So the other day I was thinking, okay, well, what if my life is a reflection of, yes, the stories that I have, what I do and what I feel. So if it's so hard for me to figure out what that is as me, what happens if I just pretend that I'm watching my life as a story, like a Netflix show, and going, okay, what's that character think about themselves? How do they feel? What are they doing? Would that be a helpful thing to do?
100%. And like you've really hit on something, like that's so wonderful. You've hit on something that actually exists within like a therapeutic framework, which is, I'm not sure if you're familiar with Joseph Campbell's The Hero's Journey.
I've heard of Hero's Journey, yes.
Or we could say the heroine's journey. And what that's looking at is like this capacity to take really more of a bird's eye view as to my experience across the lifespan. As though, like, the hero's journey is basically present in almost like every movie or book that you've ever seen. And that is like that it follows a particular story arc that someone is going along. Like, even if you look at, I don't know, like Lord of the Rings or something, like they're going along in their normal life, not questioning anything. They're just existing and living, and things might be okay. And then they're presented with a challenge. And then they usually, in response to the challenge, there's some kind of pushback, denial, not wanting to take responsibility. But then there's this call to action. And inevitably, with that call to action, they go through this kind of often like a traumatic experience or something that's very, very challenging. And it's almost like we're rising to the occasion there. And it's through that kind of that story arc there that they emerge with like a new sense of wisdom or some sort of new understanding of themselves in the world and of the world. And, you know, we can also apply that to ourselves as individuals also. And that is, you know, where am I in this hero's journey right now?
Mm-hmm.
You know, if I could step back and see myself as a character in this story, what are the struggles that she's facing? What are her challenges? What has led her here? And where is she going? So what's this all in service of? And so, yes, like being able to step back and see yourself as a character, absolutely. You know, that could be a way of really tuning in with what these beliefs are. That can be really helpful.
When you're saying like, and where is she going? This is, I guess, the power of intention. So
Yes.
go, okay, where do I want to go? And I was actually chatting to one of my friends the other day, and he was like, oh, I was talking to my psychologist, and he was saying, thinking that you are so good at vision, so good at going, okay, this is where I want to go, that is sort of not your problem. That wasn't the wording that he used, but I'm sure that's not what the psychologist said to him. But it was almost like you live too far in where you want to go, that you're unhappy, not necessarily unhappy, because he's a very happy guy, but just sort of like there's always something more, which if we reverse that, I'm not enough now.
Yes, 100%. Really spot on.
So
Yeah.
it's like, how do we have the intention and in that hero's journey going, okay, this is where she's going or he's going, and also are like, okay, I'm okay now.
Yeah. Yes, that's a great question. And I think, like, to me, that really hits on, I know I've spoken about this already, but it really hits on the importance of values. So if we think about the distinction between values and goals, goals have an actual outcome that we can tick off and say yes or no, we've achieved it. And sometimes we can get really attached to goals and that they're so inextricably linked with self-worth that we are kind of almost much more vulnerable in that place to the not enoughness part, and also to feelings of maybe disappointment or dissatisfaction once we've reached the goal. Whereas
You get
values,
there
you
and you're
can,
like, okay, well, what
yeah,
next?
and now what? Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's like, it's this unrelenting pattern here. And often what comes with that is that when you achieve a goal that has been driven by the striving mode, so driven by, I have to do this in order to be enough, for example. When you reach that goal, often what happens is you might feel relief, but you won't necessarily feel pride. That sounds like that resonates.
I'm laughing because this is something that I have experienced, and also a lot of my friends are in a similar situation to me. Everyone's sort of striving for something.
Yeah.
And I actually used to hate it when someone would say, I'm so proud of you. I would hate it. So when you're saying pride and proud,
Yeah.
it's similar.
Yeah. So what would happen for you when, like, what do you think was happening there when people
I
say,
would think two things. Either, depending on the person, which is interesting, you didn't do anything to help me with this. Like, stop trying to take credit. That's where my mind would go to. They said I'm proud, which is so yuck to sort of say out loud. But anyway, there you go. This is how my mind works. And also, I would think, well, if I'm proud of myself, then what? Then I just stop. And then what next? So it's this constant striving instead of, I guess, what I'm hearing you say with the goals and the values and how I'm applying it to myself. It's like, yes, you have the goal to write X book or whatever you want in your life, but it's the values is how you go about it.
Yeah, and absolutely. And I think I think also to add to that, that goals that are driven by values will allow you to experience those feelings of pride. So even if you don't achieve the goal, you have a sense that like I'm here showing up to my values, like and it's in that space that will create a life that's worth living. I'm acting in accordance with this internal compass. It's like things are right in the world because I know I'm aligned with that. But
It's
you know,
almost like
when
you feel alive every day of your life, not just
exactly.
when you get the thing that you want.
Yes. Yeah. So values are lived in the moment, whereas goals are in the future. So you can show up, for example, if you have a value around connection, you can show up to that any moment of the day if you want to. It can be in like messaging a friend or saying hello to your local barista, but we need to tune into that too. So I can know that I really showed up to my values here. And I think that's where also kind of the notion of intention setting does come in. So, like when you think about intention setting, am I setting a goal or am I actually setting an intention? So, the intention, like when you wake up in the morning, a goal might be I want to go to the gym today. We can tick that off yes or no. An intention might be more a quality of how I show up. So maybe I show up to the gym with a curiosity. Maybe I show up to my day with gratitude. Maybe I show up to people with, like, I don't know, compassion. Or maybe there's a curiosity element here. So the intention is like a frame or a lens for the day rather than an achievement orientation. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, and I like that because I guess at the end of the day, if you're being ruled by goals or to-do list
Mm-hmm.
things, you can look at that list
Mm-hmm.
and I don't know whether any of the listeners or whether you previously did this or still do it. I know sometimes I do. You'll have a list and you can tick things off,
Yeah.
and then I'll go, oh, well, I got everything done, so I mustn't have had enough on there. Like,
Yeah. This
that's like, okay,
unrelenting
this is a
standard.
recipe for, well, you should have crammed more in. And then it's like, what the hell? And then you're so fatigued and tired, or you're just doing the things and it feels like possibly you're going through the motions. You're doing the best you can.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like you're just setting yourself up for you're going to be disappointed at the end of the day,
Yeah.
even though you've actually done all these things. And maybe because you were so stressed about the lack of time that you've created for yourself, you're not going about it in alignment with your values. You're feeling rushed. You feel like you don't have space for joy, connection, all the other
Yeah,
areas of your life.
absolutely.
So then it's just this whole concoction of, well, of course this is happening.
Yeah. Another alternative is that you set too many goals, or you set goals and you don't get them, you don't reach them. And so then when you get to the end of the day and you haven't ticked off all those things, the mind is going to have so much to say about that. And that's so it kind of goes in either way. Like I haven't set enough goals for myself. And then the inner critic comes on board, or I didn't reach the goals and the inner critic comes on board and gives you a hard time in that space too. So,
Or
whilst
maybe
of
we're
course,
setting goals that we actually don't really want. We think we want. And it's like you're setting this goal because you saw this person on social media do it or your
yep,
neighbor or whatever. And you're
100%.
like, oh, I should do that. You're like, but do I actually want that?
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. And that's where like we really want to ensure that our goals are really basically like a scaffold or a scaffolding our values. So that we're setting a goal that is in line with our values rather than setting a goal that is driven by external expectations and standards or the perception that if I do this, I will feel blah. Or if I do this, I will make this amount of money. And of course we need money. Like I don't get me wrong there, but we're wanting to ensure as best we can that our goals are led by our values.
Hmm.
And so for example, like when you talked about like writing a book, for example, if that or any pursuit that we have, if something big like that or like a degree that you're doing or a job or something creative that you're producing, when that is entirely driven by like the need for self-worth or approval seeking or validation from external parts, that journey and that process will be very hard. Yeah. And so like when we're thinking about creating goals, we really want to think about, so is this in line with my values? Like, is this on track? Basically, is this goal on track with the kind of person I want to be, with the kind of life I want to cultivate?
And I think that's so interesting because, for instance, with me writing my book, I I didn't plan on writing it.
Yeah.
It just sort of came about, and I was like, oh, okay, I guess I'll write a book. And I moved and left a stable job and started a business and was studying this. And it's like, okay, what are you actually doing here? You don't
Yeah.
actually need to try and cram everything in at once, right?
Yeah.
This is very enlightening. I'm realizing a lot of patterns, but my mind or my ego brain was saying, you're writing this for other people because it's, oh, this is going to help a lot of people. But underneath that, I feel on a deeper level was I need it to help other people. If I'm not helping other people, then what am I doing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So it was this like, well, if you're not helping others, then you're not enough. So
Yeah,
it's
that's
this
a good
like,
catch.
well, it's a lovely thing to do, and that was the goal, to be able to write it to help other people. But then it was almost this like driven from, well, if you're not helping other people, then you're not enough. It's like the self-worth is tied to it again,
Yes. Yeah,
which is,
absolutely.
I realized after publishing it, and I was like, oh, I didn't think I was writing it for me. I'm like, oh, okay. I was, to a degree. So it is really that piece. So back to the values, how might someone identify what their values
Yeah.
are?
Yes, that's a very important question. So there are lots of different ways in which you can do this. And, one of the tools that I would often use, for example, is a questionnaire. So you could Google values, list of values, and like just even really do a very basic kind of interviewing of yourself in that process. And really, we want to make sure that we're thinking about values as something that can never be ticked off, basically. So how we distinguish a goal from a value is like
I'm just thinking about all the people listening to this, like all my friends are like, oh, to-do list, like tick, 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 tick. I'm like, you're going to hate this because you can't
Yeah,
tick it
I
off,
know.
or you might love
Exactly.
it.
Exactly. So if we were to choose, let's just say we choose a value of creativity, is that you can never tick off and say, "Yep, I've ticked creativity." You might have behaviors that you can tick off and say, "Yes, I've been acting in accordance with my value of creativity today," but it's never ticked off. It's an ongoing quality of behavior. So it might be, or if we think about kindness, an act of kindness might be showing up to a friend that's having a really hard time. Once you've done that, you can't say, well, right, I've ticked the box of kindness and that's all I need to do now. So it's really very much that it is an ongoing quality that we're looking for.
Sorry, with that, I have a question. So say, for instance, we have a value of kindness or connection.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, okay, I'm showing up for my friend that's going through a hard time and I'm being kind to them, which is an amazing thing to do. What happens if you are simultaneously going through a hard time? You're like, okay, I'm showing up for other people. Is there a level of we need to show that value to ourselves first before we're doing it to others, or simultaneously?
Yes, that's a really, really good question. And I will really emphasize this, that values are bi-directional. So what that means is that they go towards people and towards ourselves. So if you hold a value of kindness and you're showing up in lots of kind ways to your friends, but you're not towards yourself, then we've got a problem. So yes, absolutely, beginning with this knowledge that values absolutely go towards others and towards ourselves. And so we really do need to take some space to also ask ourselves, like, for example, is this coming at a cost of my health and well-being to abandon my own needs in order to show up to meet the needs of someone else? And then, like, this is kind of a larger topic, but if I'm not attending to the values that are directed towards myself, like kindness, for example. So if you were to attend to kindness as a value towards yourself, that when we do that, it actually offers you more resources to show up to other people.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that's really important, particularly in boundary setting, is that I hold great compassion for myself so that I can show up to you with more resources and more support. Because if we abandon ourselves in the process of helping others, that will lead to burnout. It also can lead to resentment. It can lead to frustration, and it can leave you feeling very lonely and under-supported. So yes, absolutely, it goes both ways.
Let's take a body break. Think of one thing you've been holding on to tightly, an idea, a to-do list, an expectation, and just let it go for now. Unclench your jaw, wiggle your fingers, soften your stomach. You're allowed to feel safe right now. Let this be enough. Okay, so when we're feeling stuck, let's summarize it all.
Yep.
If you feel like you're feeling stuck right now, and you may or may not have identified this sort of pattern that's got you into this stuckness, what do we do from there?
Yeah. So from there, we check in with our values. We uncover what they are. Then we also really see if we can, as best we can, utilize that observing self skill. So being able to step back and notice all the stories that are here. We can then bring in this kind of practice of self-compassion and using the body. And these are really skills that require a lot of practice. So I'll absolutely direct listeners to learn more about self-compassion, for example. It's much harder said than done. But the other really important piece in here is to keep moving. This sounds really tricky, but that we need to move our feet, and we have control over our arms and legs, even if we don't have control over what's going on in the mind and in the body. We have a choice to keep moving. And what I mean by this is there's a beautiful ACT therapist called Robin Walser, and she has this wonderful term, which is that we live life from the feet up. And that is that we move our feet first, and then the head and the heart follow. So it's almost like something as simple as maybe I'm feeling stuck in not being able to move my body. Moving the feet first might look like putting my exercise gear on, and then the rest follows. We don't have to move down into the bigger picture here. What is one small movement I can do today, even if it feels minuscule? What is one small movement I can do that would be on track to this kind of valued direction? So there's this kind of big emphasis here is that even if I have these overwhelming feelings, I still have control over my arms and my legs. Does that kind of make sense?
100%. I went to a practitioner training with Bessel van der Kolk, Body Keeps the Score.
Yeah, great.
Crush on an 82-year-old Dutch man. He's amazing.
I would be the same.
He's a fangirl, huge. But he spoke about this Pavlov, one of the godfathers of psychology, as you would be very well aware of.
Yeah.
I'm not sure whether you've heard this story, but I'd never heard of it, where there was a flood in the lab and the dogs got freezing cold water up to their chest. So he's telling the story. I was like, oh, I've never heard this story before. And then the dogs didn't drown. The water drained out. And then when they continued to do the studies, the dogs started behaving very differently to how they were in the studies prior. And he was like, what's happened here? Why have they changed? And what he realized was they had a stress, which was the cold water, but they were trapped. They couldn't move. And what happened was their story part got ingrained in their body. The body was like, okay, you've got this stressful event. You've got all of these different hormones that are coursing through your body that their role is to mobilize you, to run, to fight. But you couldn't because you were in your cage. So that's where stress can become negative because you're not actually utilizing, like stress hormones are great when we utilize them for their effect. But that what you're saying there is like, oh, okay, start from the feet up. And it might be putting your exercise gear on, or sometimes it's like just lay on your bed and move your toes or just move your feet up and down. If you're really, really feeling stuck.
Yeah. It may even be something as simple as, like when I say moving your feet, we're looking at action. So like one small action, and it doesn't even have to be in relation to like exercise, for example. It could be like, if I'm going to journal today, I'm going to write 2 words. That's still you starting with the feet. That's this small action here that absolutely moves us from this place of immobilization and into like even a gentle space of movement here, where I can see I have actually created a small space choice here. And then often what we know is that like when we start to move, we get momentum. Like even from a physics point of view, movement creates momentum. And with that momentum, we will then start to do more and experience more.
And it is almost like you're reimagining a story. Like again, if you were watching someone on Netflix and they were stuck in that challenging part of the hero's journey and they took no other action, like, that would be a really boring TV show to watch.
Yes,
Like, okay,
exactly.
so they're just like stuck on the couch the whole time. You'd be screaming at them being like,
Yes.
maybe just like get up and put your shoes on, or like lift
Yeah.
up the vacuum cleaner. You don't have to do anything, but it's just a little thing. And you'd be cheering them on and cheering them on and cheering them on when you're watching it. And that's almost like, yeah, you are imagining, or you're
Yeah.
creating a different reality by
Yes.
taking different action.
Exactly. Because like we know fundamentally that change does not occur in stasis. So change doesn't occur when we're standing still. It only occurs when we start to, even like the tiniest step forward is where change and growth starts to happen.
Yeah, love that. So your book is
Yeah.
called Unstuck, which is
Yes.
very, it's a perfect word for what we've been describing. And in it, you say you offer tools to help people live a life without limits. And I'm sure there's probably a lot of things that we spoke about in here. I feel less stuck than I did
Oh,
out of this. So thank you. But what does a life that is truly limitless feel or look you?
yeah. Look, I think I want to acknowledge in there that on the surface, it can feel like that's an outrageous statement, really, that like a life without limits. And I think that might conjure or bring to mind things like finances, conditions, exposure to harmful events. And I'm not talking about that. What I'm talking about here is that even amongst and amidst great trauma, we have a space for choice. And so we may not have control over what like the cards that life has dealt us, but we can choose how to play them. And that is like how we offer ourselves and how we relate to that internal story, how we relate to our body, and finding the space where we have little ways of having choice, basically. That amongst everything, that there is and there always will be some kind of choice that we can take.
Yeah, which I guess is having choice is the opposite of having a limit.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
I love that. Well, I can't wait to get my copy. It's out May 20th.
It is, yeah.
So exciting. I just wanted to end on this final question, which I do with every expert guest. And it's, if you were to give birth to a baby girl, I don't actually know. Do you have a daughter?
I do. Yep.
Okay.
She's
Well,
5. Yep.
okay. With your 5-year-old daughter, what's one belief that you want to instill in her about her body that she would carry with her?
Yep. So it's funny because she's very sassy. I love her. And so like my well-meaning messages often get like, bypassed. But I hope as she grows up, and I actually have the same intention and wish for my son as well. But my hope that she has that she has learnt in her life that her body holds so much wisdom. Like I would love that to be the lesson, that she doesn't ignore it, or that she learns, really almost that she learns how to read the map so that she gets the keys in some ways to, to where she wants to go. And yeah, I think that would be like, if she could come away from this life and having learned that there is so much wisdom in this body, I would die a very, very happy mum.
It's almost like that her body is her compass for her life.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Love that. Well, that is exactly what I aim to do with everything that I'm doing.
Amazing.
So I hope one day something that I do can come across your lovely daughter and everyone else's daughters as well, because it's...
Well, she'd be more inclined to listen to you than me.
Well, I'm more inclined to listen to you than I am my own inner critic. So that's perfect. Dr. Emily, thank you so much for joining us on the What's My Body Telling
It's
Me
my
podcast.
pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
If this episode resonated and you feel like you're stuck in the space between symptoms and solutions, you're not alone. I've been there too, and that's why I created all of this. From the book, if you're just starting to listen, or the test if you want clarity your bloods couldn't give you, or the body-led experience if you've tried doing it all and still feel flat. Well, sometimes you need something specific, like one of our symptom series, for a deep dive support on topics like fatigue and menopause. So wherever you start, just know your body's already guiding you. Share this with someone who needs it, and don't forget to follow and rate the show. Please remember, this episode is for educational purposes only. Always consult a qualified health practitioner before making any medical decisions. Every body is different, and so is every healing journey.